Several months ago, while I was in San Diego, California, I attended a study class of our chapter down there, and they were using as their text a rather remarkable book whose theme was that all of human life is governed by certain laws, and that violation of these laws causes disease. What was further remarkable about the book was the fact that it was written by a young man of only 34 years of age. This book, called Human Life, Its Philosophy and Laws, has been out of print for some time, and today is considered a collector's item. The man in San Diego who owned this book told me personally that he wouldn't part with it for $1,000. Now, the brilliant promise shown by that book was fulfilled in the following years as volume after volume came forth from the brilliant mind of this man. And always there was the predominating thought in these books that health comes about not by what others do for you, but by what you do for yourself. Some of these books have been translated into foreign languages and have been widely acclaimed by thinking people all over the world. This man somehow also found time in the later years to publish his own health magazine, and for 21 years it has come out month after month and is considered the most fearless, hard-hitting magazine in the health field today. What is unique about this magazine is the fact that its advertisers do not control its policy. This man also established his own health school in San Antonio, Texas, to which thousands of people have come throughout the years to learn from first-hand experience by fasting the marvelous self-healing powers which reside in their own body. I know it's rather trite to use the word great, which is so loosely bandied around these days, but right now I can't think of another word which adequately describes a man who has devoted himself constantly for over 40 years to bring forth the knowledge that health must be built, it cannot be bought. We're very proud to have with us today this truly great humanitarian, and we'd like to present him to you now, Dr. Herbert M. Shelton.
Thank you, Miss Barnes. You know, something strange going on here in Chicago. At least a half a dozen women have told me since I came into the hall this evening that they had a dream about me last night or the night before. In each case, I really think it was a nightmare. At any rate, this is my first experience in giving an Easter sermon. And I'm happy to see as many here this afternoon as are here, since it is Easter. And I'm also happy to see that there are a few people here who came down to Chicago or to Chicago to hear this lecture from some considerable distance. I saw one man here from Buffalo. I don't know whether any people in Chicago recognize the existence of a place called Buffalo, but there is a town of that name. And here's another fellow here from Iowa. I'm glad to see all of these out-of-towners in here for this particular lecture. And then I would like to say, before I get started to talking, that I took a little walk this morning out on the streets, and I watched the zombies go by, and the thought that came to me in my mind was that the resurrection has been delayed too long. not sure that we shouldn't have the whole city of Chicago here. Looking at them as they pass, they need to know how to recover health. And that is the reason, that is one of the big reasons they need you. Those of you who have acquired or are acquiring a knowledge of natural hygiene and who are acquiring health and who know how to maintain it after you have acquired it, they need you as missionaries among them to carry to them the message of natural hygiene, to carry to them the message of health by healthful living, to make them understand that health is not for the individual here and there, but it's for the millions. And this was the rallying cry of the early hygienists, health for the millions, not just for the few. And I would like to see every one of you. It doesn't make any difference to me whether you listen to me or buy my books. I sell more books in London than I do in San Antonio. They'll always sell, whether you buy them or somebody else. That is not the point. The point is, after you have acquired the knowledge, see that somebody else gets it. After Miss Burns had her say at the necessity for obeying the laws of life in order to regain health or in order to maintain health, there isn't too much I need add, but I'm going to go into a few details anyhow. In the first place, let us understand what natural hygiene is, so that we'll know by what means we are attempting to regain health. Natural hygiene is a system of mind-body care that relies exclusively for the maintenance of health and for the restoration of health upon the elements of health. It relies upon those basic requirements of the living organism by which the human race maintained its health and spread over the earth long before there was any profession of any kind that attempted to heal the sick or to immunize the well against sickness. It is a system of care that belongs not to mankind alone, but to the whole animal and vegetable world. It consists in supplying the body with all of the primordial requisites of organic existence within the needs and capacities of that organism to make use of those needs. The older method, I mean the younger method actually. This is the original method. Natural hygiene belongs to life and is coeval with life. It came into existence when life first appeared on the earth. Not just when human beings first appeared on the earth, but when first life appeared on the earth. Natural hygiene came into existence. It has been with us ever since. And it is of such a character that we cannot abandon it completely without producing instantaneous death. With our efforts to get away from it, more or less, and to abandon it here and there, we produce chronic disease and slow dying. But a complete abandonment of it would mean instantaneous death. So, it is important for us to understand then the elements of natural hygiene. What are they? Well, first let us start with air. I said if we completely abandon natural hygiene, we produce instantaneous death. Suppose some of you who don't believe that, put it to a test. Stop breathing and see how long you last. But it is not enough, if you want to maintain health, to merely breathe. There must be something worth breathing. In other words, we need to breathe pure air. We need something more than the carbon monoxide that we fill our cities with. Something better than the fumes and the dust and dirt of the city's atmosphere in order to have the highest health. Air is one of the primordial requisites of life, and there is no form of life that can exist without it, neither plant nor animal. Food is another one of the primordial requisites of health. And each one of you is saying to yourself, well, now I eat every day. And some of you are saying to yourself, well, I eat all day long. I said within the capacity of the organism to make use of it, not within its capacity to pass it through the digestive tract. And many of us are doing just that. If you pardon a statement that may sound a little bit off color, many of us are merely fertilizer factories. We're not turning out flesh and blood, and bone, and nerve, and glands. It is important that we eat, but that we eat within our needs, and that we eat foods that adequately supply those needs, without excesses and deficiencies. Oh, it is not possible to exactly eat precisely the amount of each particular food factor that you need at each meal or on each day, nor is it necessary. The body carries within itself at all times a certain amount of reserve that it can utilize in compensating for a slight deficiency if it is not too long repeated. And it carries within itself a certain reserve functioning power that enables it to dispose of a slight amount of excess if it is not too great an excess or if it is not too often repeated, so that adjustments can be made within ourselves to take care of slight deficiencies or slight excesses. We do not have to weigh and measure our food any more than we have to weigh and measure our air. But it is essential that we have the kind of food that meets those needs. Now, what are you eating? Well, I'm going to assume that the people in this audience are trying to eat sanely and rationally. But the greater portion of the American population are trying to live on a diet that is predominantly refined and processed with additives and adulterants and colors and so forth placed in it that make it inadequate to supply the body's needs and unfit to go into the body. Many of these additives, or perhaps we would better say all of these additives, are actually toxic. They're disease-producing. Now, our diet, we eat an enormous amount of bread in this country. We have to have bread 3 times a day. We eat it between meals. We have it with hot dogs and hamburgers and sandwiches. Besides having it with our meals, we eat it in the evening before we retire. We have it with our snacks. We have it as bread, we take it as cake, and we take it in various forms as cookies and crackers. And most of it is made of white flour, which means that at least 75% of the minerals of the wheat are discarded in the manufacture of the white flour, and that all of the vitamins are destroyed, and much of the other food value of the wheat is thrown away, and you get very largely a starchy product, a very badly denatured product. This is merely representative of our diet. We take white rice and we take the denatured cereals. We love those breakfast cereals. They all are there advertised to stick to our ribs, and they will. They make very fine paste. And that's about all they're good for. Some of them have been cooked so much. There are certain of them that have been shot out of guns, and others have been cooked 2 or 3 times, and the more they're cooked, the less food value they possess. Others are made into mushes, and you eat them as mushes, and mushes don't digest. So you get these things as foods. And then we eat and drink, or rather, an enormous quantity of milk in this country. And the milk is practically all pasteurized. And pasteurized milk has much of the original food value of the milk destroyed, so that it's tossed away. We eat embalmed meats. We eat canned goods. We eat candies and cakes and pies and pickles. and preserves. We drink beer. And our diet as a whole is of such a character that it does not adequately meet the nutritive needs of the organism, so that we are a dying people. We're sick. We're lacking in energy. Our grandfathers and even our fathers used to work long hours, steady through the day. Nowadays we have short hours and 40-hour weeks, and we're asking for an even shorter day and shorter weeks. And even with all this reduction of our work time, we have to have coffee breaks in order to get through the day. We're growing weaker and weaker as we go along. We're boasting of the fact that we're living longer than we did in the past, when this is a statistical fiction and not a fact at all. The average length of life is greater because there has been a great reduction in the death rate of babies and children. The actual length of life has not been increased. As a matter of fact, we're dying earlier now after the age of 40 than we used to. So our boast is empty. We need to learn to eat foods as old Mother Nature produces them, without processing them, without refining them, without all of the arts of the cook. And I think we should call it the black art of cooking, that destroys food almost as effectively as does the refiner and the processor. But food is one of the primordial requisites of organic existence. Sunshine is another. And how many of you ever get any sunshine? You clothe yourself so the sun doesn't reach your body. You live in caves and canyons where the sun never shines. In the larger cities, sometimes you rarely see it. And then water. How many of you have had a glass of water in the past several years? Oh, I know you've had your chlorine cocktails, but I'm talking about water. Just water, without the iodine, without the chlorine, without the fluorides, and without all the other drugs that are added to it. How many of you have had a glass of real water? How many of you are escaping the drugging practice, the wholesale drugging that is going on? Drugging without previous examination and diagnosis. It's impossible to properly treat a patient without making a diagnosis, we are told. But you're being treated wholesale without a diagnosis. Whether you need it or not, it's being forced on you. Whether you want it or not, it's being forced on you. All in the name of what? Health. H-E-L-L-T-H. That's what most of you are going through. Exercise is another essential of existence. Activity, work, play, physical movement, physical motion. And by the way, in the last issue of the Saturday Review, the American Milk Producers Association has a 4-page article. I assume they paid for it because it is actually an advertisement for milk. But they have a 4-page article in which they stress in the first half of the first page the need for exercise. They have joined the President's crusade for fitness. And the rest of the article is devoted to explaining to you the virtues of milk and all of the food value that it possesses. They don't mention that this food value exists in the milk as the cow produces it, and not in the milk as they turn it out to you. Nor do they point out that the milk was produced for the calf rather than for you. It meets perfectly the needs of a young growing calf. It doesn't meet perfectly your needs. And particularly after it has been pasteurized and standardized and homogenized and treated in other ways to render it less and less like milk and more like something that you shouldn't take it off. But they are advocating exercise. Now, exercise is not, by itself, a means of producing and maintaining fitness in our young, nor in our middle-aged classes, nor in the older people. But we do need exercise. And how many of us take it? I ask people this very frequently. Oh, I take walks. Somebody started the story a long time ago that walking is almost a complete exercise. So they go out and they saunter along. They don't walk fast enough to get their heart beating a little more rapidly. They don't walk fast enough to have to breathe a little more deeply. They just saunter along. They do window shopping. They listen to the birds and look at the flowers. But they don't actually get any exercise. And they don't walk too far. They're afraid they won't be able to walk back. Not sufficient exercise to meet the needs of life. Rest and sleep are just as essential as exercise. So do we take it? No, we take a stimulant. And then if we can't sleep, well, then we take a sleeping pill. Now, nobody ever slept when he took a sleeping pill. They become unconscious. They go into a stupor, but they don't sleep. Stupor is not sleep, or sleep is not stupor. One is a physiological state. The other is a pathological state. One is a state of poisoning. The other is a state in which some of the most vital activities of life go on at their most efficient rate. Those building up processes that we know as anabolism, the repair of tissue, the replenishment of cells, the restoration of used up material, the repair of waste, the replacement of waste, and of wear and tear, all takes place during sleep and rest. It is not a passive state, but a very active one, and it is essential to preparations for further activity of the physical and mental type. So when we merely drug ourselves and go into a semblance of sleep, we are not recuperating, we are not resting, we are not sleeping. And when we are tired and need rest and take a stimulant instead, we do not sleep, we do not rest. We simply goad ourselves into further activity. Cleanliness is one of the essentials of life, and most of us today do take baths. Emotional poise is essential to health. There is nothing more destructive of functioning power, of health, of vigor, than emotional irritations, emotional disturbances, emotional conflicts, worry, fear, and anxiety, self-pity, jealousy, and spitefulness, and conflicts. These things help to destroy us. And instead of cultivating emotional poise, we seem to cultivate emotionalism. We rather glory in our worries. We like for our neighbors to know why we are worrying and what we are worrying about and how terribly worried we are. And the more we talk about it and the more we think about it, the more we worry. And did it ever occur to you to sit down sometime and see how many things you worried about for days and for weeks because something terrible was going to happen, some great loss you were going to sustain, and it didn't take place? Just think of all the fun you had worrying about it before it happened, and then it didn't happen. And what good would it have done you if it had happened, to have done all the worrying? It only reduced your ability to meet the emergency when it did arise. Worry is not a proper way to meet the problems of life. We do not meet them with fear, but with courage. Not with worry and timidity, but meet them head on with determination. Warmth is one of the needs of existence. I understand you've had 2 days of fairly warm weather here recently. Of course, you do have your steam-heated houses with the windows down, so you get plenty of fresh air. These are the elements out of which health is synthesized. Mental poise, fresh air, sunshine, warmth, food, water, exercise, rest and sleep. These are the elements with which old Mother Nature has built and maintained the vegetable and the animal worlds throughout all past time, and she is still doing it. And so far as the evidence shows, she'll continue to maintain health and strength of the vegetable and animal world throughout all time to come by these same means. Not with exotic materials, not with materials that are known to produce disease in the well do we restore health. We do not produce health by manipulating the body. We do not produce health by some fortunate accident. We do not have to research and research and research and do some more research to find more and more and more toxic substances to introduce into the body with which to restore health. Health is not built by toxins. Health is not built by those things that damage the body. Health is not built by those things that have to be taken off the market every few days because of the damaging side effects they produce. The elements out of which health is built don't produce side effects. That's one of the important things in recommending them to you. They do not produce side effects. Now, natural hygiene, in as far as it applies to the recovery of health, consists first, and I'll discuss this first a little later, first in finding and removing from the life of the individual all of the impairing factors that have produced and that are maintaining the impairment of the organism. And second, a proper adjustment of the primordial needs of life to the crippled state of the organism. We do not have any cures. We do not peddle cures. We do not promise cures. We do not offer cures. Curing disease is a species of voodooism. It had its origin in voodooism. Of course, the word voodoo is an African term, and so far as its use in this country is concerned, it's rather modern. But the actual system that we know as voodooism is but a continuation of the old ancient system that the anthropologists refer to as primitive magic. And it is out of this magic that the program of poisoning the sick in order to restore them to health was evolved. This is not the way to health. What do we depend on then for recovery? If we do not have cures, how do we expect the sick to get well? We depend, so far as the healing process is concerned, now not a curing process, but a healing process. So far as the healing process is concerned, we depend absolutely upon the internal forces and processes of life themselves. These are the healing processes. Every living organism contains within itself, as a part of itself, just as much of it as the circulation of its blood, as the process of digestion, the process of respiration, the power to repair damages, to heal wounds, to knit broken bones, to expel toxins, or in other words, to heal the wounded and the sick. That process, that ability, that capacity is part of life. Some of the lower orders have more ability in this respect than we have. There is a little animal low down in the scale called the polypus that can be cut up into several small pieces, and each small piece will grow into a complete polypus with all the organs of the original animal. But more than that, the animal can be taken and turned inside out. and the inner skin becomes an outer skin, and the outer skin becomes an inner skin, and the outer skin that has been turned inside not only becomes an inner skin, but does all the functions that were formerly performed by the inner skin. And the inner skin that has been turned outside not only becomes an outer skin, but performs all the functions that were formerly performed by the outer skin. There are many lower forms of life that have even more remarkable powers of self-repair and of self-replenishment than the human organism. But we have sufficient power of self-repair and self-restoration that we can depend upon it in perfect confidence to restore health where it's possible to restore health. Wherever that power is lacking, there is nothing we can do that will provide added power. We can supply only the needs of that power of health, power of healing, only the needs that it works with, the materials of its work. And these are not exotic materials. These are not something in health, in disease, I should say. These are not things in disease that the body cannot make use of in health. The sick organism has undergone no radical change. It has no radically different needs to the well organism. It needs food, not poison. It needs fresh air. It needs rest and sleep, not stimulants and sleeping powders. It can't use these things in health. It can't use them in sickness. It can use in sickness the same things that it can use in health, but it can't use them to the same extent. I said we need exercise, but who would think of giving exercise to a typhoid patient or a pneumonia patient? No, there comes a time when more rest and less activity are required, when less food or no food is required. This is a process of adjusting these primordial needs of life to the capacity of the crippled organism to make use of them. And that is the sum and substance of hygienic care of the sick, in as far as it applies to supplying the body with its needs. The other thing that I mentioned is the removal of all causes of impairment. Now that actually is the first step in recovery. Because if causes are not removed, they continue to produce effects. I only know of one group that even pretend that they can restore health without removing cause, or that they can prevent disease without avoiding its cause. Now, they have means of immunizing you against sickness. After you're immunized, you don't have to worry about cause. You can take as much cause into your body as you wish. It won't hurt you because you've been immunized. Now, it works very simply. I'll give you an illustration by referring to one of my own products. I'm not here to sell it, nor to advertise it, but I'd like to tell you about it anyhow. I'm sure that most of you have had the experience more than once in life of being burned. Not severely burned, but sufficiently burned that a blister formed. And there was fluid in that blister. Well, I took quite a bit of fluid from such blisters, and I put them through a process of trituration and incubation, and turned out a product that I call Blisterine. Now, I inoculated 3 subjects with Blisterine. I gave them an inoculation once a week for 3 weeks. Then, assuming that they were immunized, I took each of them and I sat him down on a red-hot stove. All of you have heard that old saying that he that sitteth upon a red-hot stove shall arise quickly. But these 3 men only sat there and laughed at me. They had been immunized. Now, it is funny, isn't it? I never could get a manufacturer interested in manufacturing Blisterine on a large scale and marketing it, so I never became wealthy. But it's just as ridiculous to think that you can immunize yourself against one cause as it is to think that you can immunize yourself against another cause. You either avoid cause or you suffer the effects. And there isn't any other way to do it. And you either remove cause or you continue to suffer the effects. If you're sick, removing cause is the first step in recovery. And if you do not remove it, well, you're in the same boat with a man who might try to sober up a drunk man while he continues to drink. It just isn't possible. So long as you keep drinking, you stay drunk. And when you stop drinking, you sober up automatically. You don't need any treatment. You neither need serums, nor vaccines, nor drugs, nor operations. You don't need to be X-rayed, and radium rayed, and cobalt rayed. You don't need any of that. You just need to stop drinking. And the automatic processes of healing and restoration take care of the damages and restore you to a state of soundness, a state of vigor, a state of well-being, a state of soberness. Remember how they do it in the movies? Well, this theme has been played so often in the movies, I'm sure that many of you have seen it. You have a small town football team that's just winning all the games. And it's winning all the games because of a one-man football team that's, he's just unbeatable. The other players are just around as window dressing. The gamblers move in on a certain day, and they want to clean up. And they know they can't get anybody to bet against the hometown team because it's sure to win. So they want to bet against the hometown team themselves. But to do so means to lose unless they can get rid of this one-man team that's doing all the winning. So they engage a lovely young blonde. They always get a blonde. I don't know why. You know, I never was a gentleman. I always liked blondes, brunettes, and redheads. Well, at any rate, they get a blonde to lure this football player into her hotel room, where she gets him in gloriously drunk. Time comes for the game, and he's not on hand. So they seek for him, and they search for him, but they don't find him. So they have to go into the game without him. And they're losing. But some of his friends continue their search, and by some legerdemain, they finally find him. But he is so drunk he doesn't know who his friends are. They get him in their car and they rush him down to the football grounds, and they slap him a few times in the face, and they give him a glass of tomato juice and 2 or 3 cups of strong black coffee. They dunk his face into a trough of cold water, and they put him in a cabinet and they sweat him. And then they take him out and they put his uniform on him, and he trots out onto the football game, and in the last half of the 9th inning, he wins the game. Now you do this in the movies. You don't sober up a drunk man by any of these means, or by all of them combined in real life. They haven't the slightest effect on his drunkenness. But this is what we try to do when we treat the sick by any means that does not remove cause. It does not matter whether we use drugs or some kind of drugless procedure. If it doesn't remove cause, it doesn't restore health. It may palliate symptoms. If you suffer with what they call on the radio acid indigestion, you can take an aspirin or an Alka-Seltzer or Bel-Ans or Tums or Pepto-Bismol or some of the other drugs of that type, or just common baking soda from your kitchen. And you can get a few minutes of respite from your discomfort. Then you can go out and have another meal of the same kind and suffer with the same indigestion and take another pill. And you can keep this up day after day until you kill yourself, both as a consequence of the wrong eating and as a consequence of the drugging that should never have been done to start with. These palliative procedures only blind you to the fact that you're killing yourself by your wrong eating. and enable you to go ahead and eat wrongly without feeling too much discomfort. They actually encourage you in doing the thing that you should not do. And the more effective they are, the more apparently successful they are in palliating your symptoms, the more they encourage you in ignoring the thing that is causing the symptom. You have a headache. What causes it? Well, you say that's caused by indigestion. Well, this is not the cause of your headache. We may say this is the immediate cause of your headache, but to find out what's really causing the headache, you've got to go back to the indigestion and find out what's causing the indigestion. But you don't do that. You take an aspirin. That gives you a few minutes of respite from your headache. Then your headache recurs and you take another aspirin. And after you've taken aspirin for a certain length of time, the aspirin itself causes headaches. And now you're an aspirin addict. You're taking aspirin to remedy headaches that are caused by aspirin. You're just like the morphine addict who is taking morphine to suppress the pains that were caused by the prior use of morphine. You're an addict, and that's all there is to addiction anyhow. It's that search for relief from the unease, the discomfort, the distress, the pain that is caused by the use or by the taking of the drug to which you are said to be addicted. Drugs don't form habits, you do. You're the habit-forming thing, not the drug. And it's the search for relief that causes you to continue to take the thing that's causing your distress. It does. Stimulants weaken you. But if you take another stimulant, it gives you a temporary pepping up. So you take a stimulant to palliate the symptom that was caused by the prior taking of a stimulant. And that's addiction again. Now, there are other kinds of stimulants besides drug stimulants. There are emotional stimulants. There are mechanical stimulants. There are thermal stimulants. You can be very, very greatly stimulated by getting a punch in the back. And you'll get up off the adjustment table feeling fine. But if you keep it up, you'll become very enervated as a consequence of the constant pounding over a spinal center, giving you mechanical irritation or mechanical stimulation of that nervous system. Or you may do it with cold baths. Oh, how wonderful you feel in the mornings after you've had a cold bath. You feel so good, just as though you'd had a cup of coffee. And for the same reason, you have excited the organism into resistance. And we're conscious of our power only as we expend it. The strongest man who ever lived is not conscious of his power while he's asleep. When he's active, he's conscious of it. We're conscious of it as we expend it. And anything that excites expenditure makes us feel better temporarily. But when the inevitable reaction sets in, then we return to the same source of excitement to reproduce the prior feeling of well-being. But we do it at great expense to ourselves. This is the fallacy of using tonics and stimulants when we're weak. The fact is, the weaker we are, the more we should avoid such things. Because the weaker we are, the less energy we have that we can afford to expend. The more necessity there is for conserving our energy rather than for wasting it. The old fallacy, originating apparently with Hippocrates, that desperate diseases require desperate remedies, has resulted in sending many desperate cases that might otherwise have recovered over the divide years ahead of the time when they would otherwise have died. It's still being done. 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 Today we're told that certain antibiotics should not be given in colds and minor ailments because we may not be able to take them when we have more serious trouble. Of course, I don't think we should take them at any time. But this is merely an expression of that same old fallacy that desperate diseases require desperate remedies. When actually the more desperate the condition, the more need there is for doing nothing, for conserving the energy of that patient in every possible way. The patient under such conditions should be allowed complete quiet and complete rest, and nothing but warmth and water and fresh air should be given to that patient. And if it's possible for him to recover, he'll make a quicker recovery that way than by gouging him and goading him and pricking him with poisonous drugs, or with massages and manipulations, and with heat and with hot and cold applications, and with electricity and other means of stimulating activity. Stimulation is always wasteful of the energies of life. So we need to remove cause. Now, how do we do it? Well, in the first place, to remove cause, we've got to know what it is. Pick up any standard work on the practice of medicine, turn to any disease that you want to, and read it, the description of the disease. Read about its history, read its symptoms, then come down to etiology. And under etiology, in 99 cases out of 100, it'll state that the cause is unknown. You treat the symptoms as they arise, which means you palliate symptoms. Cause is unknown. Now, if you don't know the cause, what can you do? Palliate symptoms. If you don't know what causes an enlarged tonsil, you can remove the tonsil anyhow. If you don't know what causes a headache, it's always possible to remove the head. I understand that after the head is removed, it is impossible to have another headache. And I say that it's just as sensible to remove the head as it is to remove the tonsil. That it's just as sensible to remove the heart to cure a heart disease as it would be to chop off the toe to cure a corn. Removing organs instead of causes is not sane practice. Remove causes and let the organs recover their health. Let them repair their damages. They'll do it spontaneously and automatically if we remove causes. But we've got to know what they are. Now, we started our career with the idea that God was the cause of our diseases. He got angry at us for something we did or something we didn't do, and he sent sickness upon us. So we prayed, and we sacrificed, and we observed rituals and ceremonials, and we visited holy places, and we did penance. We did all of these things to get God into a good humor and to get him to restore us to health. Then the idea became current that the gods didn't actually send the disease themselves. They sent spirits to bring along the disease. So, after a time, the spirits began to behave by themselves. They didn't wait for God. So there were evil spirits, these were. So evil spirits caused our troubles. And to get rid of them, we had to exorcise them or cast them out. And we did it by incantations, we did it by amulets, we did it by charms. We did it in various ways, but we got rid of the evil spirits. Then came the idea that disease is due to natural causes rather than to supernatural causes. But they didn't know what the natural causes were. They developed the idea that the human body is made up of 4 humors: phlegm, blood, yellow bile, and black bile. Now, we know what yellow bile is, and phlegm is, and blood is, but nobody knows what black bile is, but it was one of the normal constituents of the human body in the past. And disease was due to an imbalance of the humors. So in order to restore health, you had to restore the humoral balance. This was done by depleting the patient, by vomiting, by purging, by bleeding, or by overfeeding him by repletion, overfeeding him and so forth. But what caused the imbalance? Well, hotness, dryness, heat, cold. These were the chief causes of imbalance. If your imbalance is due to hotness, they didn't remedy it by making you cold, they bled you. And the bleeding practice continued right on from the time of Hippocrates right down to well within the second half of the last century. Nowadays they reverse the process. They used to kill everybody by bleeding them to death, and now they kill everybody by transfusing them to death. First they bled them and then they transfused them. An old physician of the last century said, farmers bleed hogs to kill them, physicians bleed patients to cure them. They killed more than they cured by that process. Now, when you don't know cause, you can't remove it. So how do you find cause? Well, the way we go about finding it is to analyze the way of life of the patient. We say that cause is the violation of the laws of life and our way of life. So we go into the mode of life of the patient. You come into my place. Thank you. Is this a nice chlorine cocktail?
I wouldn't guarantee water, liquid.
You come into my place and we sit down and we begin to analyze what you do. How do you eat? What do you eat? How much do you eat? How do you combine your foods? After we get through with your diet, we take up the rest of your life. We go into your emotional life, your sexual life, your working life, your exercise or lack of it, your sleep or your lack of it. We take up all the ways of all of the things that you do and all of the things that you don't do. When we have completed our analysis of your way of life, we are in a position to put our fingers on things and say, here are the things you are doing that you should not do. And here are the things that you're leaving undone that you should do. And here, then, are the causes of your disease. Here are the corrections in your way of life that must be made in order that you may get well. We do not say, here, take this prescription down to the drugstore and have it filled. Or we do not say, here, take one of these pills 3 times a day. Or we do not say, here, run over to the hospital and have your appendix removed. No, removing causes is the beginning of recovery of health. It is the beginning. When you remove causes, they cease to produce effects, and the body soon repairs the damages that have been previously produced by its own automatic processes. It's been doing that for all time in the past. Long before there was a physician, long before there was a magician, long before there was a priest, long before there was a profession of any kind that looked after the sick, that process of restoring health by the intrinsic forces of the organism was carried out. And it's still going on. These are the processes by which health is restored today. But we must first find cause before we can remove it. Now, you can send a smear to the laboratory from the throat or from the nose or from the vagina or from somewhere else, or you can take a blood sample and send it to the laboratory, and you can have it analyzed chemically and microscopically and in various other ways. And what do you find? Well, I'll give you an illustration. There was a lady that was crying, and she cried for days, and a physician was called. And he collected a lot of her teardrops, and he sent them to the laboratory, and he had them analyzed. And the report came back that they consisted of water and a few saline substances. So he knew what was in the woman's tears. But what caused her to cry? The analysis of the teardrops didn't reveal the cause of the crying. So he didn't know what to do. So he gave her a tranquilizer, of course. As soon as the effects of the tranquilizer wore off, she started crying again. So he gave her another dose. And after a while, she became a tranquilizer addict. Now she has to have tranquilizers Isn't this a ridiculous program? Analyzing the ashes to find out what caused the fire doesn't reveal cause to us. And yet practically all the laboratory work is of that character. Looking for symptoms, looking for effects, looking for results, looking for end products, but never discovering causes. And when causes are not discovered, causes cannot be removed. When causes are not removed, causes continue to produce effects. And as effects continue to be produced, they continue to pile up. They mount up and up and up. And the condition that starts as a simple trouble becomes a formidable one as time passes. And the treatments with which symptoms are palliated become added causes, so that the treatments themselves help to make you sicker and sicker and worse, until they shorten your life by days, weeks, months, or years. Now, what can be more simple than locating the cause of the trouble and removing them, supplying the body with its requisites of existence, and depending upon the power of the body to heal itself, to restore you to health? Nothing. And yet sometimes it's a very complicated process. Sometimes we get cases, they ultimately recover, but they're tough problems. We have to make changes, we have to make adjustments, we have to keep searching. We don't find everything the first time. Sometimes we get patients that are not very candid with us. They don't tell us everything. They don't answer our questions honestly. They hide things so that we're not always working with full light. And it takes time to get some of the truths out of them. I remember one woman that came to me a number of years ago that after being at my place for a certain length of time left there. And after she left, I learned certain factors about her previous life that had I known while she was there, I think I could have helped her. But she went to another hygienic institution, and she died there. Now, I say she died. There are certain grounds for thinking that she committed suicide. Nonetheless, I believe that had I known while she was at my place, things that I learned afterwards, that I might have been able to have prevented that death. But we do have cases, we have people who... I remember a young girl who came to me once from New Jersey. She was very frank in telling me about her eating habits, her exercising habits, her working habits, her emotional habits, and everything else. But when we came around to discuss her sexual habits, she said, "What are you talking about? I never heard of anything like that. I don't know anything about it." She gave me no information. About 3 days later, I was in the room to see her, and she was reading a book on sex, and it wasn't mine. Then she started asking me questions about the subject. And I said, "I thought you told me this is a subject that you didn't know the slightest thing about." She said, "Well, Dr. Shelton, you were a perfect stranger to me, and I didn't want to talk about it." Well, you can't blame a young girl for feeling that way, but at the same time, if we don't know, how can we do? How can we remove causes? How can we tell you how to correct your way of life if we don't know what's wrong in your way of life? And the only way we can find it out is by you telling us what you're doing. And be frank about it. And give us the full answer. Well, most patients, when they go to tell you about their troubles, they tell you all the physicians they visited. "I went to Dr. So-and-so, and he told me so-and-so, and he treated me thus, and so on." Now, all this is irrelevant. You have to listen to it because the patient wants to be heard. They don't want to talk. They want to tell you all about it. So you spend a lot of time listening to irrelevant material that if you could just ask the patient's questions and get a frank and candid answer to the question and leave off all of those details, it would take us less time to find out what we wanted to find. Sometimes you spend an hour with a patient when 15 minutes would be enough. But it must be done because, well, they have to get it off their chest, so to say. They've got to get it said. They want to know all the abuses they've been through. I had a woman came in the other day. She came in from Florida. She lives just across the river from New York. But she's got asthma. Now she says, I can't fast. I've tried it. And I couldn't take a long fast. I just wouldn't do it. I'm too thin. And I said to her, now look, you've come all the way from Florida here to put yourself under my care. And it's going to cost you $50 a week for me to take care of you. If you're going to prescribe, and I'm going to carry out your orders, you might just as well go back to Florida, because if you know more than I do, you don't need my services. When I told her she had asthma, she said, no, I don't have asthma. I just have bronchial trouble. Somebody had told her she had bronchial trouble. Well, she has bronchial asthma. Has it very definitely. But she was very much surprised that the missing of the first meal resulted in a reduction of her symptoms. She says it must be the fresh air. Well, now, fresh air is very valuable, and it does help. But I could have given her an evening meal that evening and given her all the fresh air she wanted, and she would have still had her paroxysm that same evening. It must be the fresh air. They like to think that some little something that has very little to do with the relief they receive is the cause of it. Because, well, we don't want to fast. Now, what has fasting got to do with removing cause? Well, first let us trace cause. We live in such a way that we deplete ourselves. We deplete our nerve energy. We produce a condition that we call enervation. We do this by excesses. We do it by our deficiencies. We do it by our poison habits. We do it by our emotional habits. We do it by taking drugs and various types of treatment. We deplete ourselves. This lowers our functioning power. Lowered functioning power means checked elimination. Checked elimination means the accumulation of waste matter in the body. And this produces a toxic condition, which is basic to all of our troubles. That self-generated toxic state is the basic cause of all of our so-called diseases. So, the first step in getting well is the removal of the systemic toxemia. Coincident with that must be a restoration of normal nerve energy. Fasting, which is a period of physiological rest, not only enables the body to recuperate energy, but it also enables it to step up its eliminative process, so that we get a more rapid elimination of the accumulated toxin. Rest in bed, emotional poise, which means mental rest, and sensory rest, which means getting away from noise and television sets and other things that we use our vision as well as our hearing, and it to stir us up emotionally. Physical, mental, sensory, and emotional and physiological rest enable us to restore nerve energy. The most depleted organ can be rested into full functioning power. And this means that our elimination is stepped up, and we free ourselves of our accumulated toxic load through physiological rest, through mental rest, through physical rest, through sensory rest. And that is the reason that fasting is an important factor in getting well. Fasting is something that is used throughout the animal kingdom in illness. It is something that is used by animals when they're severely wounded. It is something that is used by animals under various conditions and circumstances of life. The ability of an animal to fast, the ability of an animal to go sometimes for very long periods without food and survive, is an ability to survive under conditions that would otherwise result in death. A hibernating bear sometimes goes 7 months or longer without food. And the ability to go for such long periods without food means the difference between the ability to survive and to die of starvation during the long winter. And the same thing is true of animals that estivate in the tropics through the dry season. The ability to go to survive long periods without food is the difference between the ability to survive and to die of starvation during that drought. Fasting is used throughout nature under many circumstances and conditions, and especially is it used in acute sickness and in severe illness. But it is also employed to a lesser extent in chronic disease, and we employ it even more because of its great virtue and value in that condition. But it is not a cure. Fasting does not cure disease. As a matter of fact, fasting doesn't do anything. It is a cessation of doing. Fasting is merely a cessation of eating. It is a physiological rest. And the body does, in rest, what it can't do under conditions of full speed ahead. So it's one of the means of adjusting the needs of life to the capacities of the organism, or the needs of the organism, under the condition that exists at the time of sickness. We need fasting. We need physical rest. We need mental rest. We need sensory rest. We need fresh air. We need sunshine. We need quietness. We need warmth. These are our needs when we are ill. We need to stop smoking. We need to stop drinking. We need to cut out the tea and coffee. We need to cease our overeating. We need to cease taking all drugs. Perhaps we need exercise, but if we're suffering with pneumonia or typhoid, we don't need exercise. Many people need exercise when they think they need rest. Many need rest when they think they need exercise. But these are the elements, and these are the factors that help us to produce and to maintain a positive, a vigorous, vital state of health, one that pulsates with joy, with the very thrill of living, not one that such as you see walking down the streets of Chicago. As I said, as I watched them this morning, I thought the resurrection had been delayed too long. A man or a woman who looks like a zombie and walks like one, it's certainly not a good recommendation for the way of life that we lead in this country today. And there is no doubt about it, we are the sickest people in the world today. Oh, we boast that we're the healthiest people in history. I saw a poster the other day on a billboard. Showed a little child, must not have been over 8, 9, or 10 years of age. And the sign said, "I am cured of cancer." Can you imagine a little child of 8 or 9 or 10 having cancer? But we've got it. We've got it. It used to be known as a disease of later life. But today, our children are developing cancer. Now, to be cured of cancer medically is to be still alive, even though you still have cancer, 5 years after the diagnosis is made. That's the cure. If you still have cancer, but you're still alive 5 years after the cancer is diagnosed, you have been cured. Now imagine saying that same thing of a person suffering with tuberculosis. Even though he is skin and bones, still coughing, still bringing up enormous masses of rubber-like sputum, even though he still has his night sweats and his afternoon rise in temperature, even though he's too weak to walk, he's still alive 5 years after the tuberculosis is diagnosed. Consequently, he's cured. Or imagine taking an arthritic case who starts perhaps with arthritis in one ankle and who is still living 5 years later, although he's on a wheelchair, and saying because he's alive 5 years after the diagnosis, he's cured. This is not the kind of cure you should want, is it? It's the kind you're getting. But what I started to tell you about is the fact that children today are suffering with cancer. And instead of putting them on billboards and advertising the fact, it's something we ought to be ashamed of. It's a disgrace to our culture, to our boasted civilization, that our children are being handled in such a way, that they're being cared for in such a way that they're developing cancer even in infancy. Instead of advertising it, I think we ought to take the advice of our grandmothers. Some of you older people will remember this advice. They used to say, you should go and crawl in a hole and pull the hole in after you. That is exactly what we should be doing under the circumstances. It reminds me of a similar type of thing that we sometimes see in the newspapers. We see a 5-year-old boy or a 4-year-old boy, and sometimes even a 3-year-old boy smoking a cigar. The picture of the boy with a cigar and a story about how early it began to smoke. Now, instead of parents advertising their fact that their little babies that have just shed their diapers a day or two before are smoking, they should be so ashamed of it that they keep the boy out behind the barn where nobody can see him at all. And yet they put it in the newspapers and flash it over the world. This, of course, is to the glory of the tobacco companies, who have assured us that tobacco does not contribute to the cause of cancer of the lungs. They have their own research workers telling us so. An amazing thing about this culture of ours is that we've got thousands and thousands of young men and women attending colleges and universities, taking courses in science. And they're not only willing, but they're eager to prostitute the knowledge and the talents that they have when they get out of college in the service of special interests like the tobacco companies. And they'll take the money and they'll do what they're told, what they're paid to do. And they'll lie to the people because their job depends on the lies. Sometimes I think the worst element in modern civilization is our educational system. Sometimes I think the medical profession is the worst element in modern civilization. And yet I know that the poor flunkies to the drug companies are just that and not anymore. The real source of the trouble is the chemical industry. They educate the physicians. They tell they tell the colleges what they can teach them and what they can't teach. They tell the physician what to prescribe and how much to prescribe and when to prescribe it. They have their magazines and their reports and their literature going into the physician's office in every mail, and their detail men making regular trips to physicians' offices, telling them about their new drugs and how to use them, when to use them, and what conditions to use them. And it is this chemical industry that educates and trains these flunkies who like to call themselves scientists and who come to your bedside with their squirt guns and their knives and saws and their chemicals to restore you to health without making the slightest change in your way of life, without requiring that you cease doing the things that are producing and maintaining your trouble. No, they've got cures. Why bother with removing causes when you can cure? Why bother with requiring the man to cease drinking when you can give him a drug that will sober up and let him continue to drink? That's the story. And then sometimes I think there are other things that are worse than the medical profession. Sometimes I think the theological crowd is the worst element in our culture. They teach the same idea. They teach that you can get forgiveness for your sins. You don't have to stop sinning. You can pray and get forgiveness. They teach you that your sins have already been atoned for, so you can go ahead and commit them. Now, this only encourages you to carry on your sins, and I'm using sin now in the biblical sense. The Bible says that sin is the transgression of the law. And it doesn't say that it's the transgression of just the law against killing. It may be the transgression of the law against gluttony, against overwork, against overambition, against worry and fear. There are many laws of life, and the violation of any of them may be properly classified as sin. In that sense, that sin is a transgression of the law. So we keep on transgressing until a few hours before death, then we pray a few times, and we go to heaven. Now, of course, none of you believe that. That's a slight exaggeration of what's actually taught. But at the same time, when you analyze it, it isn't too much of an exaggeration. We need a complete revolution in this world of ours. We are rotten ripe for revolution. But we are so doped with hot dogs and tranquilizers, with beer and tobacco, with brainwashing, that we don't even recognize that we are in need of that revolution. We're not capable of clear thinking or of straight thinking, nor are we capable of acting. Oh, there's a man here, there is, and a woman. I offered recently to buy 12 of the finest guillotines that France manufactured in preparation for the revolution, but I haven't been able to find anybody that would be willing to operate them. Before we are going to see in this country a healthy people, we are going to have to do more than merely tell people how to get well. We're going to have to provide for them the means of recovery. And so long as the only thing they can get to eat is processed and refined, they're not going to get the proper foods. Now, a woman said to me this morning, "Where can I get organically grown foods?" I said, "Well, I don't live in Chicago. I don't know where they're sold. But I do know that if you get them, they're going to cost you anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 times what the same foods that are not organically grown cost." Now, there isn't any sense in that, except that the people that are growing organically grown foods are simply exploiting you without mercy. Isn't it a ridiculous thing that you can go to the ordinary store and buy figs for 20 to 25 cents a pound, and go to the health food store and buy the same figs at 50 to 70 cents a pound? This exploitation of things is going to have to come to an end if we're going to expect people to become interested in proper eating. They're going to have to be able to get foods at a reasonable price. And that's only one of the things that's going to have to take place in this revolution that is so urgently needed. We have got to create for ourselves a climate for health, an atmosphere for health. We've got to create a social way of life and an economic way of life that fosters health instead of one that fosters disease, as does our present way of life. Now I have people come to me and they want to get well in a week. They've been 50 years getting into their present condition and they want to get well in a week. So there's another element of recovery that I want to discuss for you, and that's the time element. We get sick by habit. And it takes a long time to make us sick. The human organism is a tough thing. It can stand a tremendous amount of abuse. It can repair a lot of damages during the night that we create during the day. And it can keep this up for a long time before damages accumulate to the extent that we can say we are very sick. To get sick, we have to fight against stubborn resistance on the part of the body itself. To get well, we work with that same force. Not against it, but with it. So we ought to get well quicker than it takes us to get sick. But certainly we can't get well of conditions that have accumulated over a period of 40 to 50 years in a week. But people do expect me to lay my hands on the sick and say, take up thy bed and walk, and have them go out whole. Now, we just can't do it. Getting well is a process of evolution in reverse. We have evolved into our state of arthritis. It has evolved out of our wrong way of life. And it's taken time to reach the status it is when you come to me. And we have to evolve back into good health by a reverse process. And that takes time too. It can't be done quickly. Oh, but it's expensive. Of course it is. I have people say, I can't afford to stay at your place. It costs too much. You can stay at my place for a whole week for what it costs you to stay one day in a hospital. You get more value out of one week in my place than you got out of a whole year in a hospital. It's not expensive when you consider that it costs you less to stay at my place, getting nursing care, food, professional care, and everything else for under that one cost, for less than it costs you just for a room in this hotel, without food and without nursing care and without professional care. They say it's too expensive. I charge him $50 a week. Comes in a mechanic. He gets $30 to $35 a day for 8 hours work. And $50 a week is too high. Well, I could make it lower if prices go down, but not until they do. But sickness is always expensive. Even if you stay at home and stay away from work, it's expensive. The thing about it, when you realize it is expensive, is to not get sick. And that is simple. The same process that will get you well will keep you well. And the same process that will keep you well will get you well. It's all the same. There isn't any difference. You don't need something different when you're sick to what you need when you're well. You need adjustments of the same factor elements of living. And that's all. You just need adjustments. So if you learn all there is to be known about natural hygiene, and there are some things yet that we don't know. As a matter of fact, I often say that there's 2 or 3 things I don't know. If you learn all there is to be known about natural hygiene and apply it to your way of life, you can forget about the expensiveness of illness. Think about the economy of health. The most economical thing in this world is right living. First-class habits of living that maintain excellent health. Sometimes it costs you a little more for a leaf of lettuce than it does for a head of lettuce than it does for a package of white rice. But when you think of the cost, the physiological cost of the white rice as compared to the physiological benefits of that head of lettuce, actually the cost is greater in buying the white rice. Learn hygiene. Learn it thoroughly. Study it like you were studying a course in school. Pass the examination. Examine yourself. Confer a diploma upon yourself if you need to in order to encourage yourself, but study it, learn it, understand it, follow it out in your daily life. Stop worrying about the expensiveness of sickness, because it is one of the most expensive things. I once wrote an editorial on the high cost of sickness, and you remember the song that we sang following World War I, the high cost of living is only a joke, the high cost of loving is keeping me broke. Well, I wrote this editorial around the high cost of sickness is keeping me broke. And it keeps many people broke. They save money to buy a home, and just about the time they get enough money to make the first payment on a home, somebody gets sick, and out the window goes their savings. They save money to visit mother back in the other state. And about the time they get enough money saved up that they can make the trip, Somebody in the family becomes ill, and those savings are gone. It is expensive. Sickness is. So it pays to be well. It pays to know how to be well. It pays to know how to stay well. That's the reason money spent in acquiring knowledge of proper living is a fine investment. And if you follow the advice of Benjamin Franklin and empty your purse into your head, in that particular way at least, you follow some very excellent advice. Empty your purse into your head. Acquire a knowledge of hygiene. Buy books, magazines, listen to lectures on the subject. Get into this organization. Become a member of the Chicago Society right here this afternoon before you leave here if you're not already a member. Get in here. Work with these people. Learn with them. Develop with them. Grow with them. And help to make Chicago a hygienic city. You'll develop yourself. Don't be so selfish. Some of you people that are hygienists hide your light under a half bushel. You don't let people know about it. You're afraid they'll laugh at you. Well, let them laugh. There's an old saying, and how true it is, that he laughs best who laughs last. And those of you who are hygienists are going to have the last laugh. Let them laugh. A young woman, well, some of you know her, Virginia Vitrano. She came to me the other day and she says, I'm very discouraged. Everybody at school is laughing at me about the way I eat. She's going to college. They're laughing at me about the way I eat. And they say to me, well, did you enjoy your nuts or your almonds? How did you like your rabbit food? And I said, for heaven's sakes, get right back at them. Ask them how they like their buzzard diet. Ask them if they enjoyed relegating that carcass of the dead animal to their interior. Ask them if they like to follow along like a jackal after the lion's killed and feed on carrion. You can always get back at them. Don't be so timid. We can laugh too. And laughing does us good. And especially if we're laughing at the follies and the frivolities of those around us. Laugh at their stupidities. Let them laugh at your wisdom. You'll get the last laugh. The future belongs to the hygienists. Keep that in mind always. The other people are killing themselves off so rapidly, there won't be any need for an atom bomb to do it. Give them another 25 to 30 years and the earth is going to be so badly depopulated that nobody will think about using an atom bomb to finish off the program. Only the hygienists will be left. They're killing themselves so fast right now that if you want to make money, the best thing you can do is to buy stock in the graveyard. Now, I don't know what the program is. I have a habit of answering questions after these lectures, and I'm going to let Mr. Prorock take over here for a minute, and if they have a question period arranged for, I'll answer some questions for you.